discretion is advised.
What's your biggest I screwed up moment? When I was in 7th grade, my parents woke me up from bed and took me to the guest room where they proceeded to show me what history on the computer was. Had something similar happen to me. A techie guy my parents hired to clean speed up our computer's 2006 ish was cleaning up the one in my bedroom. I was 12, 13 at the time. He found the pornographic photos I didn't delete from my recycle bin. He then taught me how to delete things from my recycle bin, and to his credit never told my parents. I was a bank teller working drive-through, and I had a fat stack of cash in an envelope roughly 3,000 ish that I had set aside because I needed my manager to take it to the vault because I was over the maximum amount allowed to keep in the drawer at any time. I'm just going through the motions and some guy was doing a cash withdrawal, and while I was on autopilot I sent back his tube with the envelope containing 3,000 instead of the few hundred he was withdrawing. Worst part was I didn't realize this until about 15 minutes and 10 or so transactions later. I immediately called my manager and just said I ducked up big time. I couldn't even remember which account it was on, so I had no idea who to call or who he was. He could have kept that money and we would have never known. Luckily he was a good Samaritan and came back into the branch and asked for the manager saying I believe there was a mistake. I was given way too much money, but I noticed it wasn't taken out of my account. I don't want your teller fired over this. Issue was resolved in under an hour and I'm forever thankful that guy was a good person and came back to return the money. Happened when I was about 7. Chased my brother inside the house, and as I yanked the front door open, my big toe was caught and completely ripped open between my toes. Bro said I went silent and face turned white. Then he looked down and saw all the blood on our deck. He was a great big bro. Scooped me up and set me down on some stairs with a towel. Then ran to get mom and dad. One emergency trip later, and I'm all stitched up having had to almost amputate my toe all because I'm an idiot. Our very old blender started smoking when I was using it, so I frantically unplugged it at the wall and started taking it apart. It was when I heard the whirring and felt the blade go through my fingertip that I realized that in my panic I had instead unplugged the toaster from the socket next to it. I was working a facilities job in my early 20s and was a heavy smoker at the time. I worked for a very wealthy company and had a no smoking rule. So every time I needed a cigarette I had to hide behind the building to smoke. Due to a recent change in furniture we were left with lots of cardboard and plastic wrap. So the dude ordered a roll-away dumpster to the site. This roll-away dumpster happened to be put around the corner of where I smoked. One night I was smoking and got a call to go do a fix on a machine. So I put my cigarette out before finishing it with the intent to come back later. The cigarette broke in half while I was doing so, and in frustration I tossed it into the dumpster. I do the fix on the machine and go back to the shop office to sit down. 5 minutes go by and one of the other facilities guys comes running in and tells me there is a fire. I run to a fire extinguisher and run outside to see there is a huge fire in the dumpster. So me and 3 other people jump in the dumpster to attempt to put it out. After 2 long minutes I look down and see flames coming from underneath the cardboard I'm standing on and decided to call it time to dial 911. The flames erupted 9-10 feet out of the dumpster when the fire department arrived, and it took them nearly half an hour to put it out. We were all examined afterwards and the fire department recommended we all go to the hospital immediately due to smoke inhalation. My cigarette sent 3 people to the hospital and a security camera above the dumpster saw the whole thing. I was fired and banned from the place I worked. In the end I was very fortunate nothing was damaged and nobody was seriously injured. Definitely was an I ducked up moment. 15 years ago I had one of the file servers crash in the middle of a data migration. Double drive failure at once. The backup I had was only stuff that changed in the last 7 days. Luckily only about 20% of the personal files were on that device. Luckily. Half the executives were on that device. So politically it was bad. I went to my boss right away with a quote to have the disk cluster R built. Sent the disks out that day, restored as much as I could, went home that night and told the wife that I'd probably be canned once it's all fixed. 15k in expenses, 36 hours of downtime for about 13% of the data. I ended up getting called into the CEO's office a week after everything was fixed. He wanted to know my side of the story directly. I told him that at the end of the day I'm in charge of this stuff, so it is on me. That we have an extremely tight budget which didn't allow for a lot of safety mechanisms, and that the window to move data like this is limited. So I did the best I could with what I had, and a double failure occurred. Didn't get fired. Didn't get much of a budget bump, but did get a good raise 6 million later. However, I think it took a long time to gain trust back with the rest of the execs. Not me, but my town's mayor told an EMT to kill herself during the aftermath of a budget meeting right in front of me. The regret that washed over his face when he realized it was still streaming to YouTube for the town to see was priceless. Driving home late at night from my GFS house, a 20-minute drive, I was fighting to keep my eyes open. On the last stretch of highway before my exit, I awoke to the sound of rumble strips. That's when I realized I ducked up. The first thing I saw was my car running over a reflector post in the left shoulder of the highway. Then I realized I was 1 second away from slamming into the guardrail at 50 plus mph. So I cranked the steering wheel right, which caused my car to spin right across 3 lanes of highway. Thank God there were no cars too close to mine, and that my car landed perfectly in the right shoulder. 2 things that are kinda funny from this. One, as this was all happening, there was a really peaceful slow song playing. It was like a slow motion action scene from a movie. 2, as my car was spinning towards the right side of the road, I put my right blinker on, as any safe driver would. I was driving home from my college BFS place in another city and started feeling like I was gonna fall asleep. I specifically avoided driving home from his city after dark because that highway was just a perfectly straight line and so boring that I would get super tired, and he knew that. I tried to call him to talk to me and keep me awake, but he didn't hear it. I saw a rest stop, so I pulled over and parked, thinking I would just take a minute to wake myself up. I ended up taking a half-hour long nap and woke up to several missed calls and text messages from my boyfriend. Apparently when he saw I called, he checked my location and my little dot was stopped on the side of the road, but the rest stop was relatively new and didn't show on the map. He thought I had fallen asleep, crashed, and died. Oops. Many moons ago, husband was making dinner and came into the living room while the oven was preheating. As we watched TV, an explosion rocked the kitchen. The casserole dish had exploded, sending deadly shards everywhere. It was on the burner that he mistakenly turned on instead of the oven. I temped as a receptionist for a company that sells those massive printing presses, think couple of stories high, needs reinforced foundations. Had someone call to speak a sales representative as they wanted a guillotine. I replied in the nicest tone that we didn't sell those. I mean, who calls a company that sells printing presses to buy a French execution instrument? Am I right? Turns out those big things they use to cut things like newspapers in mass quantities, we did sell them. I probably cost them a few million, as a competitor landed a big deal with a lucrative account a few days later. Guess what they bought? Pretty much anything I did while I was still an active alcoholic. But what stands out the most is when I got too drunk to take my kid trick-or-treating. I'll never forget that. I got sober a couple of weeks later and have been since. 8 years, and every time I think about it, it still makes my stomach hurt. I know people have much worse stories about what they did to their children drunk, but this just showed me how I couldn't even meet the smallest commitment to make my daughter happy. I have been a scuba diver for 22 years and have over 3,000 dives under my belt. I have seen only a couple major dive accidents. One was a heart attack. The guy lived and is doing okay now. The other happened to me and my 2 buddies. I was in the Komodo Islands and it was a drift diver dive where the current is so strong you make yourself neutrally buoyant and go with the current and relax. We were diving Nitrex, a mixture of oxygen and nitrogen with a higher concentration of oxygen than regular air. I had a mixture that was 36% oxygen and my buddies were within 0.5% of my oxygen content. This is important because under pressure oxygen becomes toxic. For recreational divers there is a depth limit of 40 meters 130 feet. This is to make sure nobody get oxygen toxicity, which normally would set in around 300 plus feet or 90 plus meters. However, with a higher oxygen content the safe level becomes shallower. We had a fourth buddy that was a part of our guides group. She was a lady that spoke little English and was very aloof. Our tour guide goes into the water and we follow him. Well, almost all of us. The lady decided she wanted to go her own way. The guide chases after her. The current is so strong we have to climb horizontally across the reef using reef hooks, and it was harder than climbing up a mountain. As we are doing this my buddy's clip breaks. My other buddy and I unhook our clips and go after our friend. As we drift we notice another group from our boat, so we join them. The dive is going smoothly until I noticed my buddy is trying to take a picture of something and is facing down staring at the ground. I go check on him and realize that he has nitrogen narcosis. Basically it makes you feel intoxicated and causes disorientation and other effects. He was severely disoriented. I grab onto him as the tour guide comes over to help. Out of nowhere the ocean floor starts dropping out from underneath of us. I start pulling us towards the rest of the group we had joined. I then notice that all of our bubbles are going down. I thought it was one of the most amazing and beautiful things I have ever seen. Until a split second later I realized we were caught in a down current as the ocean floor descends, and there is a current. The water will follow gravity, being pulled deeper, causing the water to have a current that drags you deeper. I quickly check my depth and realize I'm at 130 feet and sinking quickly. I grab my two buddies by the tank valve and kick as hard and fast as I could. I end up getting us all up to the surface. After a few minutes I notice that we are alone. I blow my whistle and hear a response, so I swim towards it towing my two buddies. Eventually I reunite with the group. However, because we all got caught in the down current and the water was moving so fast, we ended up more than a mile from the island where we had been diving. We were still drifting away. We throw up our marker buoys and start making plans to go to one of the other islands we were drifting past, depending on how long we would be drifting for. I told the group to wave the buoys in distress, but to conserve our air for emergencies and to keep our lights off until nighttime if it came to that. Luckily another boat saw us in distress and rescued us. I put us all on DCID compression illness watch and we are done diving for at least 24 hours to monitor our symptoms and make sure we don't have a fun stay in a hyperbaric chamber. We were all okay and nobody had any lasting physical symptoms. A couple of people had PTSD, which is understandable given how close we came to dying that day. At a job interview for Whataburger and the guy asks, "Do you think you could handle this job?" And for some insane reason I answered like Elle Woods in Legally Blonde when she says what? Like it's hard. After her ex is shocked she got into law school. As soon as I said it, I realized I sounded like an asshole and I watched this 30-something manager sneer in disapproval at 16-year-old me, probably shouting in his head about arrogant youth or something. He thanked me for coming in, and that was that. Needless to say I didn't get the job. The dumb shit you do in your teens, man. Doctor here. The first surgery I scrubbed into in my surgery clerkship in medical school. I accidentally stabbed the patient's liver with a tool called a trocar. Just for some background. In laparoscopic surgery, typically 3 small incisions are made, and surgical tools and a camera laparoscope are inserted in order to perform the surgery. After making the initial incision, a trocar is placed into the incision to widen the incision and to facilitate the passage of tools. Basically, I misjudged how much force I would need to push the trocar through and very slightly nick the patient's liver. I immediately began to sweat and fog up my eye protection, thinking I killed a patient, lol. Luckily, the injury was very minor and I didn't hit any major blood vessels. The surgeon cauterized the area that I hit to stop some minor bleeding, but it was fine. After we saw the patient a few weeks after taking out her gallbladder, she was perfectly fine and recovering well. After a delightful shower one evening, I decided to blow dry my hair using the hair dryer that had some exposed wiring. It had always worked decently, so I figured NBD. It's fine. Anyway, I got electrocuted and my hand got burned, but on the plus side I got to see blue lightning go pinging up my arm. I no longer own a hairdryer. When was a stupid teenager, I took double the shrooms because they were not kicking in fast enough. We were in a park and my friend had a whole ounce on her, unknown to us. The park closed at 10, right when it kicked in big time. A couple police cars came around to make sure everyone was out of the park, and we were sitting in the car. They pulled up behind us with the lights on, and I had a total meltdown. I was sweating buckets from the top of my head to the bottoms of my feet. My friend, while tripping out of her mind, calmly explained that I was having a panic attack and needed to be left alone. They believed her and let us go. I called my buddy to pick me up and take me home. Found out I had locked myself out of the house and my mom was out of town. I couldn't stay at my buddy's place, so he drove me a couple cities over to another friend's place. But when we got there was no furniture inside because they had apparently moved the week before. My phone ended up dying, so I ended up showing up at my other friend's doorstep at 1 AM. Her Catholic parents were not too happy to see me. Not me, but I went to a bank once to ask a question. I handed some paperwork to a manager who was already holding paperwork relating to a vault, presumably with very sensitive information on it. He put my paperwork on top of what he was already holding and simply handed back the entire stack. When he was finished answering my question, I looked at the stack of paper, saw that I had his document, and handed it back saying, "Is this yours?" He snatched the document out of my hands really quickly and then looked at me with eyes all scared and wide. He probably saw his job flash right before his eyes. The moment police put the cuffs on me, after being on the run for a few days, stole from my job, had a horrible heroin addiction, and was around all the wrong people. 3 months in jail and 4 months of house arrest after. Thank God I met who is now my wife shortly after, and I got my shit together. Now I have a great job and a 4-year-old son. Life is good now. It wasn't easy but very much worth the effort. This is a long one. I tried moving to Seattle from Buffalo with only 1,000 saved up, yes I know, thinking I had a job lined up. Turns out they'd only interviewed me to get information, and I scrambled to get employment as I stayed in a hostel. The temp agency got me work, but 3 weeks later the call center no longer wanted me there, and I got a phone call in the room I was staying in that I wasn't being kept. After a lot of thought, I realized no matter what that I would be completely homeless. I took the last $300 or so I had left and bought a bus ticket back to Buffalo, salvaging the stuff I could. To me, it was better to be homeless in a city I knew than a city where I knew nobody. I ran out of money completely in Wisconsin. I lost my wallet in Chicago, and by the time the bus reached Buffalo it had snowed a bunch, so it made it difficult to drag my stuff around. 2.5 years later, here I am, back at work in Seattle. I have a roof over my head, reliable transportation, 2 jobs and large number of new friends. I've been here for nearly a year now, after managing to get back onto my feet with my parents' help after the disaster in 2019. And I truly have never been happier. Your duck ups and failures are not the end of the world, even though, as I stared out the bus window in November 2019, I felt it was for me. I'd been working in it for about 3 years when I got tasked with getting our existing grassroots advocacy tool ready for election 2000. This was big. People were just starting to use the internet to find out election results. Election 98 was no problem, and our single host served all the traffic. We had 6 hosts for the election in 2000. It was about 100 hosts too few. Load throughout the day was unlike anything I'd ever seen. We'd basically just reboot them every 20 minutes so someone could see something. Didn't help that folks couldn't call the race due to Florida, so every just kept checking for updates. Next morning I thought I was gonna be fired. Didn't happen. Didn't press my luck though, and left before the next one came around. So this is a mix of my fault and the company's lack of safety concerns. Worked at a warehouse that stocked rented jewelry showcases of all kinds for trade shows. We had a trailer of 6-foot counter cases that were like 70% glass. All but the last row of cases were left on dollars for quick unloading. When it came to the dock, these cases never left the yard, they just went into a trailer to clear room in the warehouse. We were pulling the truck into the warehouse to clean them for a show. We had to open the trailer doors before backing it up to the dock. My dumbass opened the doors, then decided, while it was backing up, to run behind it to get to my buddies smoking cigarettes. Driver saw me make that move and slammed the brakes. The momentum sent all the cases on dollars into the ones off dollies and launched 3-4 of the trailer out onto the concrete. Probably about 22 cases shattered on the ground, and luckily the warehouse manager kept his cool and just said, "You are ducking lucky you didn't get crushed by all those cases." That was easily my largest contribution to company loss. Was doing a late night cargo unload at a brand new small store that was converted to a retail spot. But it was one of those setups where the truck bay door was elevated and you had to drive the forklift onto a hydraulic lift that was barely large enough to fit the wheel space. Then elevate, pull a pallet from the truck, back up super carefully to stay on the lift, then lower the lift and back off it, again and again for a truckload. It was stressful as hell, and I was actually really good with forklifts. This doesn't go the way you'd think though. I was unloading 2 giant fish tanks that the warehouse had decided to put on one pallet, end to end long ways, so they were as wide as the truck, and not use nearly enough shrink wrap to hold them in place. I carefully nab the pallet, back up, and before I can lower down the lift, the shrink wrap splits down the middle, sending both giant, expensive fish tanks crashing about 10 feet down either side of the lift. Thousands of dollars gone because someone wanted to pack the truck. Hated that lift setup. One day, I woke up, wrote to my friend, and we played the entire way out in one sitting. We had a break for lunch, and I ate some sandwiches with a funky smelling blue cheese we had in the back of the drawer in the fridge. It tasted just fine, so I didn't think much of it. Later on, I ate the rest of the cheese as a snack while we played. Oh, how wrong I was. About an hour after we finished, my coworker came to pick me up for work. We were cleaning makeshift headquarters near a factory that was being built, and we were there alone because all the workers had left for the day already. While mopping the toilets, I thought, hey, let's sit down and let's have a shit. It's kinda pushing me. So, I entered the stall with my bucket and started shitting. First, everything was nice and solid. When I finished, I wiped and stood up to put on my pants. I felt my stomach rumble, and I thought that it's not over. So I pulled my pants back down and pushed. A violent splash of diarrhea came out, like explosive diarrhea, and I was just pissing out of my ass for 10 straight minutes. Worst yet, my coworker was at the opposite side of the headquarters, cleaning the other part of the building, so she couldn't hear me. I pissed so much water out of my ass that I felt getting dizzy, and I had no water bottle at hand, and I hadn't drank much that day, so after 10 minutes of constant brown water stream coming out of my ass, I was pretty ducking dehydrated. But the worst part was yet to come. The smell was starting to build up. The window was too far away, and it was closed. I felt that familiar need to burp again, and I gagged a little, and I thought, oh no, I had just enough time to reach for the bucket with water from my mop, and I started throwing up. You know that ducking awful feeling when you throw up and shit yourself at the same time. Now imagine you are going through that for 5 minutes straight. When I stopped vomiting, I poured the bucket into the toilet, sat back down, and kept vomiting and shitting. I never believed that so much liquid could fit into a single human being. But there I was. Finally, my coworker came to my part of the headquarters to check on me. She opened my bathroom stall, and there I was, pants pulled down, squeezing a ducking bucket between my arms and things, violently shitting and vomiting. She opened up the window, picked up her phone, and called my mom. We were working for my mom's cleaning company. At that point, I was crying because I wanted it all to stop. My mom asked, "How are you feeling?" All I could say was I shouldn't have eaten that ducking blue cheese. Before I turned my head back into the bucket to vomit some more, my coworker ran to get me a bottle of water and 2 activated charcoal pills. I chugged it in one go. A few moments later, it was all over. I stopped shitting and vomiting. My head was spinning like crazy. I couldn't even sit straight. So I had to lean against the bathroom stall. My mom came to the scene. At that point, I was pretty weak. I was dehydrated. But I was alive. When I wiped and flushed, I tried to stand up. And my feet were so weak from how much I tensed up my muscles that the moment I stood up, I fell back down on the toilet, nearly passing out. I leaned against the stall, and my mom literally had to pull up my pants because I just couldn't do it on my own. They helped me walk to the car, and by the time I was home, I had just enough strength to wash myself and go to sleep. And that all because I had ducked up by listening to my stomach more than going by the common sense to not eat funky smelling cheese. Edit since this got popular and a few people got their laughs, I'm adding a little bonus story. Yep, it's about shitting and puking again, but it's not as violent. We went to visit my grandma in the south of Slovakia. Beautiful nature there. Lots of places to hike to. My mom took me, her friend, and her friend's son with us. On the first night, I started feeling somewhat sick, and I had a weird ducking fever dream about a desert. I woke up, went to the toilet, and threw up. I went back to bed, thinking nothing of it, but I threw up 2 more times during the night. Each time I went, I had to step over my friend, who was sleeping on a mattress on the ground. Never mind. I fell asleep, and woke up in the morning. Terrible stomach pain. Literally made me curl up in fetal pose due to the pain. My mom gave me some meds, and everyone was preparing to leave for a hike. I stayed in bed. Obviously, as everyone starts preparing, I have that feeling of wanting to fart. I trusted that fart, but it betrayed me. A blast of diarrhea straight into my boxers. Oh no. I ducked up. I clenched my butt as hard as I could, but I didn't want anyone to find out I shat myself. So I just stayed in bed and pretended that I needed some sleep. I had to wait for 20 minutes until the house was empty. 20 nightmarish minutes of clenching my asshole. I was lying in bed, ass dripping with liquid shit, hoping it didn't soak through and stain the bed. When the coast was clear, I ran to the shower. I washed the shit out of my boxers, washed myself, and let the boxers dry out outside. I almost killed my dog an hour after adopting her. I had just brought her home and took her for our first walk. I've owned dogs before, so I wasn't particularly stressed, and we had bought a few collars for her ahead of time, so I tried them on and went with the one that fit the best. The walk was fine until we ended up beside a busy road with no street lights. She was getting riled, wanting to chase the cars, which I obviously wouldn't let her do. She looked back at me for a moment, and then in one fluid motion, slipped her collar and sprinted out onto the street chasing cars. I've never felt as helpless as watching her stand in the darkest part of the road with cars doing 60 mph rapidly approaching. They would have zero chance to see her, and I had about 30 seconds before they got there. I ran after her, but every time I approached she just ran away, thinking it was a game. I had this rising nausea as I was sure I was about to watch my dog die. I did the only thing I could think of, iron full sprint away from her. She saw me running and chased me all the way back to the sidewalk. When she got there I just hugged her and stayed there until I caught my breath. She's fine and we walk her with a harness now. But that was far and away the worst feeling of my life. To this day I get flashbacks about it, and my hands are sweaty just typing this out. When I jumped out of an airplane for my first solo skydive with 2 instructors holding onto me, but I didn't arch like I was supposed to, so ended up tumbling through the air with only one instructor managing to hold on. He managed to pull my chute for me, but only just. Then as I was still tumbling out of control as the canopy opened, I ended up with my legs caught in the lines and therefore upside down. Also the canopy was only open about 80%. Somehow I still managed to ace the landing, but I was super embarrassed when I did touchdown. Yeah, I ducked up pretty massively. That could have had the biggest consequence. Too long didn't read. Don't be an idiot like me and take skydiving lessons seriously. Arch your back when you jump out of a plane. One summer at my grandparents' Housed in the Colorado mountains, I was playing with fireworks alone. And being around 10 or so, I wasn't exactly responsible. I ended up lighting one of those bouncing spinning things and threw it off the hill onto the gravel road. It went crazy, shooting sparks everywhere, then bounced off the road and down a hill. I rushed down after it and found that every place it hopped it had lit a fire, each one already about knee-high dry pine needles. I luckily was smart enough to stomp each one out. To this day I always think about what would have happened if I didn't go down the hill after it. I was in high school and after a football game had some friends come over for a fire. We couldn't get the wood lit, so someone had the bright idea of getting out the gas line. As I pour some gas onto the barely lit fire, the fire travels up the stream of gas into the gas can. I go into a full-blown panic as I hold this now flamethrower that may or may not explode in my hand. So I had the genius idea of tossing the gas can into my pool that was nearby. Little did I know that gas floats on water. So now my pool looks like the gates of hell, and next thing I know the liner is burnt to a crisp and water goes everywhere. My friends look at me amazed that I caught water on fire. Everyone ended up leaving and I went and got laid one last time before my mom murdered me. I was 19 or 20 and didn't know how overdraft protection worked. Keeps letting charges go through and charges fees on top, or that banks used to automatically enroll you. I overdrafted my bank account by $1,000 and didn't find out until my car was beyond empty and my gas purchase got declined. This was before the time of apps and smartphones. In my defense, got a crash course in finances that day, never did it again. Me and my friends were at a restaurant and we ate our starters and we were waiting for our main meals. I look over and see my friend at the time, a quiet 16-year-old girl, rubbing her stomach like what pregnant women in photo shoots do. I say to her jokingly, "Are you sick or pregnant?" And she instantly looks up terrified. Turns out she was secretly 8 weeks pregnant and I accidentally outed it to the table. She later on had an abortion and came to me first for support. Still feel bad about accidentally saying it out loud. I was trying to back into a parking space in my 18-wheeler in pitch black with blinding snow with barely 6 months of experience under my belt. I got the spot lined up, but the truck wasn't straight and all the backing and straightening was causing me to shimmy to the right every time I did it, and I didn't think to get out and look one more time and smash the duck out of the front end of another truck. I was fired and sent home on a Greyhound the next day. And it took me like a month and a half to find a company who would hire a guy with 6 months of experience who was fired for safety reasons. But I found a company, repaired my record, and now have 7 years driving experience, making roughly $60,000 a year. Click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.